Welcome to Sheep Suit, the home of grazeable Christian thought. Today's Brain Graze, we need real preachers now. It's December 9th, 2024, and I usually don't put the date on the beginning of these, but it is after the election. This is the first video I've done since the election, and I don't talk about politics and current events very often, but something happened. It was amazing. And I haven't felt this way for a long time. And I had to think, I felt this way before, but when was it? Well, it feels to me like the fall of the Soviet Union on December 26, 1991. I was a way younger sheep back then, but I remember how it felt. It felt like history just did something amazing that gave us a new chance, a new chance at having a future. I grew up during the Cold War. The Cold War was really scary. Both the USA and the Soviet Union had enough nuclear weapons to destroy each other. And the great strategic minds of that day came up with this doctrine called mutual assured destruction, or MAD, as it was appropriately named. And it didn't make me feel any better or safer. That was the background of my whole childhood, my whole life growing up, all the way to becoming a very young professional man. And I thought it would never end. And then one day it did. And the great decade of the 90s began. And the 90s were awesome, right? What I didn't expect then was that by 2024, we would be heading straight for a self-inflicted dystopian hell, a self-destructive culture at home that I'd seen blossom, if you want to put it that way, with my own eyes when I lived in Seattle, and a barely functional, very mentally compromised president, hell-bent, it seems, on poking the Russian bear in a way that anyone would have considered insane back during the Cold War. And then an election happened that changed everything. And it seems we've once again in my life been given another chance. And what I really believe we need now are teachers, preachers, philosophers, celebrities, entertainers, others who can bring us back from this culture cliff we almost fell off of and restore sexual, environmental, geopolitical, and just day-to-day sanity in our culture. There's probably more kinds of sanity that we need restored that I didn't even think of, but that's what I could come up with. And I don't necessarily mean teachers in schools that people have to pay to learn from, or philosophers in the traditional statue of an old guy with a beard way, or preachers that preach a half an hour a week in a building and think they're changing the world somehow by making a video recording available on a website. Side note, in centuries past, in some places, preachers preached sermons on many days of the week out of their buildings, particularly Protestants during the height of the Reformation. I read that in history. What we need is an army, let's say, of people who are capable and just decide to get the skills and do it. This past year, I read the Story of Civilization series by Will and Ariel Durant and The History of the Christian Church by Philip Schaff. Those are sets of books. That was about 18,000 pages. And one reason I read all that was so that I could do what I'm doing right here better. It's also good source material for messages. I'm sure it'll pay off. But anyway, sanity needs to start winning. The cultural trends that to me have gone in one direction since the late 1960s need to start going the other way. I don't have all the answers. If I did, this video would be way too long. But I have one wish for the moment, and that's for real preachers again. I don't belong to a church, but I visit churches. And what's supposed to be the main event, at least for evangelicals and Protestants, the sermon, is almost always a non-event these days, to me anyway. So many preachers don't even seem to know the basics of public speaking. What they do is public talking. I've sat through sermons, and at the end, I couldn't even grasp the point, the take-home lesson of what I just sat through, because it's just a disorganized blob of sentences strung together. Or the sermon is just a super emotional read-through of some Bible text with no added content by the mind of the preacher, just a lot of acting. Or it's some boilerplate lesson that's been around for decades, even centuries, and I've heard it many, many times and I know where it's going. Or it's the preacher's politics being shoved at me in the name of Christianity. That's the worst, especially the woke, leftist kinds of Christians who should know by now that that stuff leads to all kinds of evil. We've seen it, haven't we? So many professional Christians just seem like they want to play it safe, get that money, collect a paycheck, kick the can of doing genuine good, being the salt of the earth, changing people, down the road for another week until the weeks eventually run out, as they do for all of us. I've wondered how Judgment Day will go for preachers who get hired by churches with several hundred members and retire from the same church, now with several dozen members, several decades later. Most churches I visit are at 10 to 20% capacity. Granted, due to the pandemic, but that has passed. And yet they seem to be okay with where they are. And none of this is anything I need to drive across town and sit through more than once, and that out of morbid curiosity. Dying churches are grim and unnecessary, and are happening all over the place because leaders, preachers, would rather fail than change. And that's sad. And that's why I'm wearing a sheep suit and doing this and talking to you. That's all for now. Keep the wool out of your eyes.